This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast.
Time for school.
Hey, School Success Makers. Welcome to another episode of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater. I'm joined by a new guest, new friend out of St. Augustine, Florida, Brad Layland, who is the CEO of the Focus Group. And he also is just about to publish a book. As you guys listen to this episode, it'll probably be a few weeks later, called Turning Donors into Partners. As those that are watching the video recording, you can see this. It's going to launch. I'm sure you can buy it across everywhere, but specifically Amazon. I know you guys can get it on, and I'm excited to give it a read. He knows exactly what he's doing when it comes to the world of fundraising for schools. So he was a perfect guest that I knew had to come on to be able to teach what he does, give you guys some ideas and strategies that you can do as a school administrator to grow your funding. So Brad, I'm super stoked to have you on. I'd love you to just kind of introduce yourself, so I'll pass it off to you to do that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mitchell. It's great to be on your podcast and to interact with your audience. And fundraising, my book that is coming out, my wife said that the title should be the F word. And because everyone hates fundraising, and that if we had a creative title like that, then lots of people would read it. Now, my publisher, University Press, they didn't like that concept, and so they suggested we name it Turning Donors into Partners, because fundamentally, I know that fundraising is all about building relationships, and that's what the book's about, and that's what I do. I'm the CEO of the Focus Group. Our firm helps lots of amazing schools raise lots of money. And so we have a process, but at the end of the day, it's all about relationships. And so I'm grateful to be able to be here today with you, Mitchell.
Love it, man. Well, I always like to start off the episode with asking, hey, if I was to come visit you where you are there in St. Augustine, because I'm actually just a couple hours south of you in Port St. Lucie, but I've only been to St. Augustine really just kind of one time. I pulled in there, I've got dinner and some gas or whatever. Actually, I've never truly visited St. Augustine, but what would you say, like, hey, Mitchell, you got to do these things when you come to St. Augustine?
Well, St. Augustine is the oldest, listen to this, permanently settled European city in the United States, because we have had there's other places that, like Plymouth Rock, there was Europeans there first, but the settlement didn't make it. So St. Augustine, we have a fort, and downtown, you've studied it probably in school when you were a little kid. And we base our tourism by how many people, we say this is how many tourists we had, because every tourist goes to the fort. So that would be the number one thing to do. But the thing that I would recommend you do is go to the fort, and then right down the street, there's an amazing popsicle store where you could get a hippo popsicle, and that's H like hippo as in the animal. And they have the most amazing popsicles, hippo popsicles. And so I would recommend you getting the Elvis popsicle after you go to the fort. So that's what I would say.
Okay. Well, I haven't done either of those, so I will definitely do that. I know my mom and dad honeymooned in St. Augustine and went to the fort back in the day. So I'll have to put that on the list, a hippo popsicle. All right. Kind of blows my mind a little bit. All right. Well,
Thank you.
To dive into fundraising, let's, before we dive into kind of the main questions I'd love to just kind of get a little bit of background on you, kind of how you got to where you are today in the world of fundraising.
Yeah. So when I was in college, I went to the University of Florida, and I was involved with a nonprofit, a Christian ministry called Young Life. And so I was a Young Life leader. And now I had to sort of support myself through school. So I was a repo man for 2 different companies. And then I had another job, a gumball machine business that I started. And so I had all these things I was doing to make money. And my Young Life director said, Brad, why don't you just raise money, and then you can come on the student staff for Young Life. And then instead of having to be a repo man, you could work with kids, right? And have more time to do that. And so I did what many people do, is I sent lots of letters to everybody's parents, and I waited with a bated breath by the mailbox for people to send me lots of money, and no one did. In fact, the only check I got was for $50 from my best friend's prom date's father. And so I got one $50 check. And so what I then went back to my Young Life director was, I said two things. I'm not called to be in ministry, and I'm not good at fundraising. And he said to me, well, the thing is, like, if you ever wanted to get Young Life kids to go to camp, would you send them a letter in the mail and wait for their response? And I said, no, I'd go and meet with them, and I'd talk to them, and I'd tell them about how great camp is, and then I'd invite them to come with me. And my Young Life director said, well, why don't you try that with donors? And so I did, and then I had 3 meetings, and I raised all the money. And that was my introduction to fundraising. It was 30 years ago. And so I ended up going on Young Life staff, and I kept realizing that if I really wanted to reach kids, the best way to do it was to raise more money and hire more people. And so I just kept fundraising and doing my thing. And then Young Life recognized that nationally. And then eventually Young Life, I was the chief development officer for the whole organization. And we launched, during my time, there was a $250 million campaign that we launched. And so I had this great training in Young Life. And then about 12 years ago, just was so thrilled to kind of retire from my Young Life days. I'm young, but retire from my Young Life days and then just focus on building God's kingdom, which includes helping lots of nonprofits and ministries, including schools, raise lots of money. And so it's been so fun to transfer everything I learned. And then, the focus group, there's about 30 of us on staff, and we're helping about 100 different organizations. And I'm going to say 2 things. We're helping about 100 organizations. First, I'll tell you, if you add up what they're raising, it's about $1.2 billion, right? And that's a lot of money, okay? But that's not really the impressive thing. The impressive thing is the literally millions of lives that are being transformed through our clients that the $1.2 billion is creating. And so that's my background. Like, I do it, I lead the firm, I get to help great schools. As you know, Mitchell, I helped start a classical Christian school in St. Augustine, and my kids go to a Christian school. And so I get private school education, and it's just it's a dream. Like, I can't believe every day I get up and I'm like, okay, don't tell my clients this, but I'd work for free because I'm so thankful for what we get to do and get to help so many great organizations and schools.
Love it. Well, I'd love to dive into how you guys specifically do that for schools. And is there like a threshold you guys kind of work within? Like, if a school comes to you and they have 100 students and they're like, hey, I need to raise $25,000. Like, does that even mesh with you guys as a company, or you're really at the higher end when it comes to fundraising?
Yeah, no, there is not we have a policy at the focus group. It's an important one, is that we say, like, we have a way to serve every single organization. And so if you need to raise $50,000 and you're like a single person, you just need to raise 50 grand, we can help you. If you're a school that needs to raise $500,000 a year, or our largest client, we're helping them raise $275 million, right? Like, we can do the way to do it doesn't change, but the method and how much hand-holding. When you need to raise $275 million, we're on site with you doing everything we can to be sure that you hit that goal. When you're needing to raise $50,000 or $100,000, then we're doing a lot of things via Zoom or using, pre-recorded training. We have a scale, because now, to answer your questions about schools, most of the time when we bump up into schools, we bump into them for 2 reasons. One, they need to raise money because their tuition model isn't covering expenses, right? And, I believe that private schools should base their tuition on the actual budget so that tuition covers the costs. Yeah. But sometimes you can't do that, right? Because either you're new or expenses are really high, right? So we either help schools that have a budget shortfall, or we seem to get contacted by schools that are needing to do capital campaigns to raise money for a new gym, or to start a STEM program, or to buy a campus, right? So those are the 2 times schools call us. But oftentimes schools are raising money and they don't call us because they're just in a rhythm. It's usually when there's pain points, either things aren't working on the annual fund or with capital campaigns. And we have a great process to help them.
Love it. Love it. Would you have, let's say, I'd love to hear this, your five, and maybe you guys do these and maybe you don't do these, but like your five favorite fundraisers and your five least favorite fundraisers that when you see people do them, you're like, they're going to not make enough money and they're going to drive themselves nuts. Do you have like a good, like any, that's a lot. I know it's 5 and 5, but I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on the good and the bad.
Well, no, thank you for asking. Okay, so I have a podcast too, and and our fundraising training program is called Taking Donors Seriously. And so if you Google Taking Donors Seriously podcast, you'd find it. And I do cover these kind of things. And I just did one because it's the end of the year. I know this isn't coming out until early January, but we're recording this in December. And at the end of the year, right, you get 1 million appeals. I don't know, Mitchell, have you gotten any requests for money lately in the mail where people are sending you stuff? Okay. Yeah. So that's a really horrible thing. Like, it's not bad to send appeals at the end of the year if it's in a larger strategy. So here's the good thing. Have a year-long fundraising strategy. Here's a bad thing. Send everybody on your mailing list a year-end appeal and ask them for money, right? Like, there's no strategy behind that. This is what nonprofits say. Well, we just sent everybody an end-of-the-year request and put an envelope in, and we'll just see, right? Well, what's going to happen is nothing, right? And so on my recent podcast, I saved every year-end appeal from last year. So I got 12 months ago, and then I talked about them, and then I picked a favorite, and I gave that one, $500, and then I talked about the worst one. Now, I mentioned the name of the organization that did my favorite, and I did not mention the one that did the worst. But let me tell you about the one that did the worst. And if I say the name of the nonprofit, you'll have to edit it out, but I think I can do it. This nonprofit sent me, I'm not kidding. And by the way, I really like them. They sent me mailing labels. They sent me a calendar. They sent me Christmas cards. They sent me a planner for the next year. And they sent me pictures that were painted of things that they thought I would like in a big envelope, and then asked me to give money. None of those 5 things had anything to do with this nonprofit's mission. They're just sending out a mailing with lots of crap and expecting me to make a year-end gift out of guilt or something. And what they should have done is they should have sent me something that related to their organization and then a note, and I would have loved to give them money, right? And so the positive is have a year-long strategy. That's one of the 5. The negative is to just do what everybody else is doing and like send an end of the year appeal with an envelope. I also hate when organizations sends newsletters and they just drop an envelope in, like we just dropped an envelope. Like what's the envelope for? Do you want me to write you a note? Like, what are you saying, right? It's so no strategy. The positive would be that you thank your donors 4 times a year. You ask once and thank them 3 or 4 times a year. Like that's the positive. Here's the worst fundraiser is having an event. Like we have these events. So many schools will do things like auctions, right? And galas, and they invite everybody to it. And they take the donor that hopefully could give $100,000 to their school, and they invite them to come eat chicken, right? At a round table at a hotel, right? And they're hoping that they get the $100,000 gift from that donor because they invited them. That's bad, right? What's good is to go out, the good side of the 5 is to go out and meet with that donor that could give you 100,000 and share with them about your school and invite them to be one of your partners, right? And then it doesn't matter if they're busy on the date of your event, right? Now, a good, again, would be that event. Do that event with chicken, but the goal is to invite the smaller donors to it. It's not that we don't care about every donor. It's just if there's a lot of people then that have the potential to give a few $100s, then invite them to an event versus the way I see it done most of the time is that we invite everybody to it. And then just, a couple more, like any kind of raffle, like that's just awful, or any kind of event that doesn't have your organization at the center of it. Like I actually do believe in golf tournaments because it's a great business strategy. But if you have a golf tournament and you just invite everybody to it to give again, that's not a good strategy. And I guess maybe if I have one more to finish this out for you, Mitchell. I'll do a positive. I really love giving, like participating in a community-wide giving day is a great way to ask people to give. And it's not your big donors, it's your newer donors, it's prospecting. And so there you go. I did some positive. I don't like events. I mean, like I'm in charge of fundraising for the Christian school, the classical Christian school. I started it in St. Augustine. We have to raise $350,000 because it's a new school and we are not at a place where tuition can cover. So our budget's about 2 million. We have to raise 350 to make budget. And we will raise of that 350, we will raise 275 of it in conversations. And then the last 75 is through a couple of events that are real strategic and it's really targeting on smaller donors and introducing new donors. And so like I'm not only a teacher, I actually do this as a volunteer for the school, right? Because I need to be able to do what I preach, right? So
Yeah, for sure. Man, well, for you guys as the focus group, what's some of the main things you guys offer as a company that are the biggest successes for organizations and schools?
yeah, I think the thing that we do the best, the thing that is most transformational for an organization is a school that needs to raise money for a new building or maybe a new program or to pay off debt. And so I think about we probably serve 25 different schools in capital campaigns. And what we really do best is we have learned to do this and we have a process. And it's going to sound bold, but our process works every single time. I've never served a school. The school comes to us and says, we need to raise $2 million to build a new gym, right? And so we have a process of doing a study with that school to determine if the gym is in fact the right project. They think they need a gym, but we were working with a school recently and we did a study and thought they needed a fine arts building. And we tested with their donors if the fine arts building for $15 million, this is a school, right, was the right thing. And we actually told them they could raise about $10 million, but not for a fine arts building. There was very few people that felt like fine arts was the thing the school needed. What the school needed was more community space, more space for the students to be together, for students to have small group meetings. And so that was in their master plan. It just was the project after fine arts. And so to be able to go back to the school and say, hey, your donors want to give you a lot of money, but you need to flip the order of those two things. And of course, the head of school and the board was like, sure, well, we love both those projects, right? So why wouldn't we? And so we do the study, we tell them how much they can raise, and then we walk alongside of the school and we make sure they hit the goal. And when I say it works every time, like we've never done a study where we didn't say there's not a path forward, right? That might not be for the project that you think, and it might not be for as much money, but there's always a path forward that advances the mission of the school. And at the end of it, you wind up with all the funds, and then you've built closer relationships with your donors. And what I'd like to share is that it's the tide rises. So you don't take a donor who was giving you 10,000 a year, and then they give you 100. They don't go back to giving you 10, right? Now for the annual fund, they're giving you 25, right? And so it's so fun. Like I love the work we do. We just finished a campaign for a school in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and we did the study for them right before the pandemic. And then we launched the campaign during the pandemic. And they wanted to cancel the campaign because they're like, the pandemic's going to be horrible. And I was like, well, does your school need these things? Oh, desperately. I'm like, well, then let's move forward. It'll be fine. Your donors love you. And if we pursue this relationally, it's going to work. And so we launched that campaign for $1.9 million. And we're ending that campaign at 2.5 million. Not only did it hit its goals, but it went way over goal, and everybody's closer. Like everybody's grown closer. So that's what I love to do. Now, a lot of schools need help with their annual fund because they're doing golf tournaments and chicken dinners and end of the year appeals, and they need to do a better job. And we do that, and we love doing that, but not as many people hire us to do that as I wish. Like I wish we could help 100 schools do that because you don't pay us much money and you're going to raise a lot more money. But for whatever reason, it seems like schools just want us to help them raise millions of dollars, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I guess it makes sense. But.
Well, with all the schools you work with, have you seen, you've probably seen lots, but like what are some of the main challenges you've seen schools face? Is it mainly just they're not good financially typically because they didn't plan ahead well enough? Like, I mean, it could be so many different things, but kind of from your point of view, what have you seen some of the main challenges being for schools?
Well, the challenge for schools and other nonprofits is that they define their need in terms of how much money they need to raise, and then they define their outcomes as in the same way about money. Like donors don't want to invest. There's this myth out there that donors want to make investments. If they knew we needed $10 million or $1 million, the need is so big. That's actually not the need. Like the need is, I think about this school we helped in Oakland, and they served the kids. If they went to the public high school, there was a less than 10% chance they would graduate from high school. And this particular school, Catholic school, had 90% of its students, same demographics, same kids. 90% of their kids went to college, right? Now, they needed to raise a lot of money. But what they needed to sell to donors, what they need to do, and schools don't do, is to describe what I just told you. 90% of the kids are going to drop out. That's the problem. Will you help us change the trajectory of lives? That's the opportunity. And that's what donors respond to. I see so many schools saying we need $100,000 to make budget. Mitchell, are you motivated by that at all?
Not at all.
Right. But how about this? We need $100,000 so that 90 kids can go to college next year versus statistically 50% of them being in jail, right? Like that's so different, right? And I remember walking down the street in Oakland, and there was this nun, and she was like 4 feet tall. I think she was like Mother Teresa's sister. And I'm not kidding, like there was this very tall person who had lots of tattoos and was like literally twice as strong as me approaching us. And I'm on the street with this nun, and there's this person getting close to me, and I'm thinking, I'm scared, right? Like I don't know what to do. I'm going to have to protect this nun, and I'm probably going to get killed. And as we got closer, the nun looked at that person and didn't judge them like I just did. Like, I mean, I judged their character by their looks. And instead, this nun looked at that person and called him by name and said, "How's your mom? How are you doing?" And this nun had built a relationship, and this was one of her former students who was actually doing pretty good, but just dressed and looked differently than me. And so that's the opportunity. And I don't see schools doing that. They don't describe changed lives. They describe their financial need or how disgusting the science lab is. Who cares? What happens in the science lab? What happens at chapel? How are lives being transformed? That's what donors give to. And I just don't see a lot of schools doing that well. They don't do their messaging right. And then, they're trying to sell. I saw one school, and their fundraiser was it was a raffle, okay? And they sold, it's going to be the worst I've ever seen, Mitchell, okay? And they divided the football field into 100 different squares. And you bought the square, and then they let a cow out on the football field, and then wherever the cow pooped, that square won the raffle, right? Does that have anything to do with a school, like transforming lives? It's just pooping on a field. It was horrible, right? Like, don't do that. Stop it, So.
Man, my son's school, they did this fundraiser, I guess it was earlier this year, and my wife joined the fundraising committee, and I told her, I was like, I feel like I should join the fundraising committee, but I don't know, I might not be too nice on certain things that I'm like, this is going to waste so much time and money, but she joined it, and they were like, we're going to do a little, they're going to do, oh my goodness, they get all these people together, you come for free, they're going to have a vendor come and make some food, you have to buy little tickets, and you can go put them in things you want to buy, and raffle off, and I'm just like, we're not going to make any money. And so I asked this head of school, I said, well, what are we raising money for? And she's like, just generally, just raising money, and I was like, I told her from the beginning, I said, well, you should put on there something like, hey, we're raising money for the playground, or raising money for something, because I said, nobody's going to want to give to our school if we're just raising money, And they never did it. We raised $3,000 at this event that they planned for 4 months. They put time and resources in it. Parents volunteered. We volunteered. I donated a free website, thinking, all right, so maybe somebody will bid on the website. It'll help. I was trying to help. And I was $3,000. I was like, guys, It was
Right.
brutal.
So the ROI is horrible because that's an event-centered fundraising, and don't do that because like you could have just if they had just said to you, "Will you give a gift?" and will you ask two or three people to give a gift, you could have raised $3,000, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that is brutal, Mitchell. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to do that. My book is a great resource. I wrote this because, there's only so much of my time and I want to help as many people as possible. There's a website for the book. You can find the book on Amazon, Turning Donors into Partners, but you can also go to the website, turningdonorsintopartners.com, and read a little bit more about it and actually download the first chapter. If you want to read a little bit more about the work we do for schools, you can go to the focus group's website, which is, Mitchell, you're an expert in. Our website is thefocusgroup.com, right? So that's fun. But we also have a supplemental website called fullyfundedschools.com, just because we do serve so many schools. And so we put together a site that is directed just for schools that isn't as general. And so those are three resources out there. And but I just don't want to see anybody doing that. What you just described, like don't do that. Don't do now. Have events like that. Like go ahead and have a fun evening. Like if you're a school, then we have one at the school we help start that is like we do a big barn night and we go out to this barn and we have barn games and we have free food and it's a whole community-wide event. And every year I got to get out there with my shotgun, so to speak. It's a virtual shotgun. There is no guns involved in this podcast. But I have to go out there and people want to do raffles. They want to charge people. They want to do all these things that are going to have no actual impact on our school, but would change the whole dynamic of the evening. Like your school probably needed to have that night, but it shouldn't have been a fundraiser, right? Because if you had just created a really good feel-good event for your school, then it would have been really easy to follow up. Like this is a true story. The school that I helped start here in St. Augustine, we did an event, a Christmas event this past week, and it went really well. And we didn't have any component of fundraising a part of it. And one of our major donors came and was so moved by what they saw that they committed a gift of $25,000 that's going to come before the end of the year and committed a second gift that's going to come in January or February of $25,000. So you do these events like the one you just did, and you make them be awesome cultivation events, and then you follow up relationally and said, would you help transform more lives so that more events like that Christmas program can occur? And donors are going to say, sure, right? Invite them to buy a raffle ticket. How much does a $100 gift card? We both go to a grocery store, Mitchell, because we live in Florida, called Publix, right? And Publix is a great grocery store. If there was a $100 gift certificate for Publix and you were at an auction, how much would you bid on that, Mitchell?
$50.
$50. Would you bid $150 to buy a $150 gift certificate?
Nope.
No. Right. So we've now taken changing lives through a school and we've put a value on it. Any donor, but if I said to you, would you give $150 to change kids' lives who otherwise would be going to jail in Oakland? You don't even know anything about that school, Mitchell, and you'd probably give it, right? Just while the story I told. So my point is, don't turn fundraising into a transaction. Turn it into an invitation for a relationship. And I feel a little bad I'm picking on your school, but they meant well.
No,
So-
and I know I have high hopes for future ones. And so here's a great question for you, because this is kind of what we're up against with this school is like my wife had a couple ideas that got shot down, and I had a couple ideas. I'm not on the committee, but whatever. Those that are listening, there's probably teachers listening and different people going, man, I really think we should do this thing that Brad's talking about. And what if he gets shot down by the school admin team? Like, how do you navigate the conflict that's in schools where they're like, we're not doing that, that's not going to work? Or how are they, we love our thing that makes $3,000 every year and we're going to continue to do it. So how do you navigate that dysfunction inside?
Yeah, well, first of all, I never recommend you cancel anything. Like if you've had an auction every year, then you got to do the auction. Like it's part of your world, but you cancel some of the approach, you change the approach. And so that's part of it, is that the first thing I would say is don't ask people, there's some sacred cows out there, and don't suggest you're going to kill that cow, right? So like it's both ends. In terms of like the focus group, like at the fully funded schools website, one of the things we put on there is like, I'm so confident in this that we'll give you back all your money if our system doesn't work, right? And so the second thing I would say is like, don't cancel, don't suggest canceling the sacred cow. The second is like, bring something up like what I'm suggesting. And here's the line. What do we have to lose? If we do this and it doesn't work, they're giving us their money back. Now, between me and you, I've never given anybody's money back. Now, there have been some schools that have not done it and have not succeeded, and that's because they haven't done the work, right? Like, and I'm not meaning like, I'm not like, I think about Steve Martin in that movie Leap of Faith, and, his solution if somebody wasn't healed was they didn't have enough faith. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, and, Mitchell, you're so much younger than me, you don't even know that movie exists, but it's a good one. You should watch it on Netflix. And so, but my point is that like when I say they don't do the work, I mean they like don't do anything. If you do a halfway job of implementing the stuff that we teach, you're going to have unbelievable success. If you fully do it, it's going to transform your school. And so but the money back guarantee is the second thing I would say. But then the third thing I would say is that like it's not all or nothing. And so if you can't make progress and the ideas get knocked down, then here's a solution. Here's a way to do it. So let's say you're going to still have that event and it's still going to only make $3,000. Well, you probably had a sponsor, like some company sponsored the night, right? And here's how most schools do it. They send an email or a letter to 1,000 people asking them if they want to sponsor it, or 100 people. And then they wait for people to respond. Like that's the bad way. The right way is to look at the list of 100 or 1,000 people and say, who are the people that love us, have the capacity to give large gifts, and have been and are generous to others? And find those 5 people. And then even if all of your ideas get knocked down, if you just say, well, why don't we contact these 5 people personally and ask if one of them would be willing to be the sponsor? Everybody will let you do that. And then your results will be so different. The relational ask would change everything.
It's good. A couple more questions for you. What have you seen schools do really, really well? There's been some that you're like, hey, there's a really unique fundraiser I saw a school do that has done really well for them. That's not have a cow crapping on a football field. But any things you've seen schools that are doing really, really well?
Well, it's simple, and it's not an event, right? So I'm not an event-centered fundraiser, but it's, this is it, segmenting your donor list. Like it's not an event, but it's an action. When I see a school that takes their list of potential donors or their families and breaks people into, it's going to sound really complicated, small, medium, or large, like put your potential donors into 3 groups, and the people that you think have the ability and connection to give you a large gift, you pursue those relationally. And then the people that might give a gift but not that big, you invite them to an event. And then the people that are like grandparents or people that you just have no clue, instead of inviting them to an event, you do a mailing. Like when I've seen schools that it's the same message, invest in lives and help us transform our community, but the delivery method changes, either in person in a small group or via a mail. I've seen when schools do that, they raise so much more money. Now, as far as events go, I'll just tell my own story. We've really leveraged Giving Day in St. Augustine and as a great fundraising strategy. And so what we do, and this is totally an event and it works really well, but it doesn't cost anything, right? And so what we do is on Giving Day in St. Augustine, which happens to be the first Wednesday in May every year, we have a competition between the classes at our school. And whichever class gets the most number of people to give, any level, like it's just which class gets the most number of gifts, they get either pizza party and putt-putt or pizza party and top golf, right? So we're not talking about big prizes, and we're definitely not talking about the stupid prizes you get for, you've seen them that kids get. It's just a group thing. And it's just in a 24-hour period, which class can get the most number of gifts. And I raise some money on the side to match gifts. So it's usually the first $100 of any gift is matched. And so we raised $60,000-$70,000 a year on Giving Day, and get 200 or 300 new people to give to the school. And then I'll tell you the story because it's even better. Wait, like I feel like I'm an infomercial. Wait, there's more. 2 years ago or 3 years ago on Giving Day, when remember the request was any gift of any size, we had a donor give $5,000. Okay, we were thinking $10, right? And so when the donor gave the $5,000, the head of school and I went and thanked them in person because that's a lot of money. And the donor instantly, and then we shared the vision. The donor instantly gave another 5,000, right?
Holy cow.
It's awesome, right? But it gets better. Two knives. So the next year we didn't wait for Giving Day. We just went and met with them. And that year they gave $50,000. Okay. And then it started with Giving Day, which the Giving Day's purpose is getting new donors. That's kind of the goal. So now we go 10 to 50, and then year 3, we went to the lunch with the major donor, and we were sharing with them the need for our school. We'd outgrown our rented space, and we didn't ask them for money. We just went and took them to a former nursing home that could potentially be transformed into a school. And honestly, in the back of my mind, I was thinking it would be incredible if we could ask them to make a gift to help pay for the down payment so we could buy the old building, right? And had lunch with them, didn't talk about money, just shared the vision. And that night, that donor called me and said, my wife and I would like to do it. I said, do what? We'd like to buy that school for you, that nursing home for you. And we'd also like to give you the money to renovate it. And so it was $2.5 million. And it started on Giving Day, right? And so, there's more details to it, and I embellished the story some. But the fact is, Veritas Classical School in St. Augustine, if you go to the website, you can see the campus that came from Giving Day and donors getting a vision for a lot more. And so,
Man,
that fun?
That's super fun. I actually really like that idea because it's in the middle of the year. It's at the end of the school year. As like things are wrapping up, you kind of get an idea of maybe some funds you can use for the fall. That's a really good, I like that idea. Is that a thing that you guys invented, or that's a St. Augustine thing?
Well, practically speaking, I invented it for St. Augustine. Like my wife and I own another business, and God's blessed us with resources that I shouldn't really have. And so one of the things that we do in our community is we started the St. Augustine Giving Day. And so Wendy and I pulled it, we offer it. And so it is something that I helped create, and we put the money up for prizes for the whole community. And then, but it's way bigger. So we do spend money to do it. But like last year, it raised about $700,000 for our community. And Veritas was a small part of that, 10% of that. But Giving Days, the reason my wife and I did it in St. Augustine is because nobody else did it. Like so many other communities have Giving Days. Like they're a thing. Most towns have Giving Days. And I just couldn't get any nonprofit to sponsor a St. Augustine Giving Day. So I just did it. But like in Bradenton, Florida, in Melbourne, Florida, like there's Giving Days that exist. And so if you're a school, you just should hop on in to the Giving Day. But I don't encourage you to do it on Giving Tuesday, like right around now. Like don't do that, because that thing has got its own life. These Giving Days in your communities are really cool. And I would encourage schools to discover. I know lots of schools participate in them, and not just the one in St. Augustine. So.
Okay. I'm going to look it up, see if Port St. Lucie's got one, because I like the idea of that a lot.
Probably do.
Okay. And if I have, then their marketing's not very good because I've never heard of it. So I need to now, I'm going to dive in and see what's up with it. So as we wrap up the episode, I always like to end with the question of giving you a chance to share a piece of advice. If you could share one, I know it's hard to, all these, you've given a lot of advice the whole episode, but a piece of advice for the school administrators that are listening, what would that piece of advice be?
Yeah, I mean, one piece of advice. Okay, I have 2 rules in fundraising, and so I'll do those one piece of advice and 2 rules. Okay.
Deal.
And so the first rule is always let people know ahead of time that you're going to talk to them about money. So my advice is don't ever ask someone for coffee or for lunch and then in the middle of it say, will you be our sponsor for our golf tournament? That feels really icky, right? And it does, and that's why people like fundraising, is because they do stuff like that. So the first rule is that if you're going to ask someone about money, then Mitchell, if I wanted you to support Veritas in St. Augustine, I'd say, Mitchell, can we grab 10 minutes? I'd like to talk to you about potentially becoming a donor for Veritas. Then you understand the context and it's cool, right? So that's the first. The second rule in fundraising is always ask people for something they can say yes to. And if I was in front of Oprah, who's very generous, she's a very generous person, right? I can't ask her for $100,000 because I don't know her and she doesn't know me, right? But if I was to ask Oprah to give a modest gift of something, she's very wealthy and very generous. So if I said to her, Oprah, we got these kids that need scholarship funds, would you pay for it? And I was actually having coffee with her, she'd probably say yes to $100 or $500, right? But if I asked her for $1 million, she'd send me to her foundation. And so, just practically the two rules, my advice would be tell people ahead of time you're going to talk to them about money and ask people for something they can say yes to, because you want to build a long-term relationship with people, not a transaction. Donors aren't ATM machines. And so, okay, lots of advice, Mitchell. Thanks for letting me ramble and tell stories. And that's what my book is. It's just my stories. There's 65 stories in my book. I think I sold about 5 of them today. I try to teach through storytelling. So thank you.
That is my favorite way to learn. It's how I taught when I was a youth pastor for years. I used the storytelling method to teach like the stories so they would actually stick in people's minds. And that's how I learned. So I remember all those stories, and I already want to tell my wife about the one where the guy donated a school. So that's pretty sweet.
Yeah,
So,
a school. He donated a whole friggin' school, right? So.
that's awesome. And I love it. So great advice there at the end. Thank you for giving of your time today. And thank you for what you're doing with your organization to help schools all over the country raise money to be able to pour into this next generation that's coming behind us. You're doing some awesome stuff. And I love being able to know you and be able to interview you today. So Brad, thank you so much, my friend. Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Brad for taking time and being on the podcast today. I love what he's doing at the focus group. I'm super stoked for him and his new book, Turning Donors into Partners. Make sure you get a copy of that. As this podcast launches, it should be launching sometime in the middle of January, I believe his book is coming out. So go get a copy of that on Amazon and give it a read, and give him a 5-star review too, because I know it's going to be an awesome book. I'm excited to read it. And I'm hoping, as always, you guys are able to take at least one thing from today's episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. And I'm hoping it's in the world of fundraising. Maybe you guys are running some fundraisers that you are just pulling out your hair and going, I mean, my goodness, this isn't making us much money. It's a lot of time and effort. There's a lot of tactics out there that I want you guys to be able to harness to grow the revenue for your school, making more money with these fundraisers. And a lot of them are in the book that Brad talked about. So go get a copy of it. I want you guys to be able to bring in more money so you can do more things with it. Obviously, money is a very powerful tool. Of course, we all know that. So go use that tool. Ask those people that are a part of your school that you know love you to give to your school and be a part of it. But obviously, you got to do it in a tasteful way. And Brad gave a lot of great insight on how to do that. If you're also trying to grow your enrollment and find ways to connect better with your families using technology, but you're not really knowing how to do that, please reach out to my team and I. We'd love to help you do that. We love giving schools new websites, creating ways for families to connect with you and to grow your enrollment. We're experts in that, and we would love to do that for you. You can check us out online, schoolsuccessmakers.com. That's schoolsuccessmakers.com. Or if you're more of a Facebook user, you can connect with us on our Facebook page called School Success Makers. It's a private Facebook group just for school leaders, and I'm personally in there. I'd love to personally see you in there too. School Success Makers. We're launching a new service first quarter of 2023. We'd love your school to be a part of it. It's called School Influencers, where I will personally coach a team of your students on how to run your school's social media so you have the best presence online that you've ever had, because you have all these little marketers that are in your school right now that you need to empower and give them the ability to do your marketing for you. And I will coach them to do that. I'd love you to join the program, School Influencers, or reach out to us to find out how to do that. We'll be back here next week with another amazing guest as usual on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then.